like to welcome everyone here, welcome staff, elected members, and also our consultants from Landscape, Mr. Alex Game and Mr. James Butterworth. Welcome, gentlemen. Firstly, so my name is Karen Redmond. I'm the Mayor of the town of Gullah. I'd like to welcome anyone who might be watching on YouTube tonight. I'd like to acknowledge this land that we gather on tonight is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. So just some basic information and housekeeping. This workshop has been convened for the purpose of discussing the recent community consultation process undertaken on the draft Gullah Beautification Plan, and also to discuss the plan or the draft plan and anything relevant to that draft plan. This session will be used solely for the purpose of information sharing and not for the purpose of debating issues, building consensus positions, or otherwise discharging council's deliberative and decision-making functions. So it's not a place where we debate issues and have long statements. It is about discussing. It's not about debating and having a set opinion. There is no set agenda and no minutes will be taken during this session. Is there any requirement to go into confidence? I'm not aware, no one's told me that, so no. So yes, I'm aware of that. So what are we going to do with them? So what we're talking about for people that can't see is we have, elected members have been provided with public consultation comments that are unedited. There are some swear words in there, which is unfortunate, which is, it's not respectful. I don't think it's funny. And if it was to be a public council document, it becomes council property. So how do we manage this, CEO? Yep. Henry, if you can, that's okay.
I'd suggest that if there's any desire to make specific reference to that document, that we would leave that to the end of the workshop and would go into confidence at that point.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. All right, so we might do that because I think it is important that we discuss some of the written feedback. And I think I do have going into confidence, but tells me every possible way I can go into confidence. So if I can be advised as to which subsection of the Act I will use, and when we get there, if that can be advised, so I can use the appropriate Act or subsection of the Act before we actually consider to go into confidence, so we actually get that correct. Yeah, we need to have a look at that. Okay, I can't see anything that's jumping off the page at the moment. Right. Okay, so if there is a requirement to go into confidence, I will advise accordingly, and we don't make decisions to go into confidence. We just go into confidence, but the relevant section of the Act needs to apply. So I'll inform people if we end up doing that, and also people who might be watching. Okay, so I think we'll get cracking now. Alex and James, are you going to walk us through your, or is that you, Sam? Who's going first? Sam, right. Sam Delena, who's our Chief Engineer for the town of Gullah, and all things beautification, Sam, apparently. Over to you.
For tonight anyway, Madam Mayor, thank you. So members are familiar with the background in respect to this project. Genesis was in the 2021 budget. There was an elected member budget bid from Councillor Goldstone that was supported through the process. We developed the draft beautification plan, and the IES committee in December thought it was appropriate to seek public feedback with respect to the draft beautification plan that had been prepared. So one of the motions was that it came back to a workshop of council prior to coming back to the Infrastructure and Environmental Services Committee for further consideration. So that's the current genesis as to, that's the current point that we're at in this process. Effectively providing a workshop tonight, giving the results of the feedback and in terms of talking through our process and effectively what the feedback, summary of the feedback, which Alex and James will talk to shortly. And then in terms of looking at some of the beautification measures that we've made in the last year or so and that are going to be occurring as part of the 21-22 budget if it's endorsed, as well as some service level adjustments that we're proposing to put to the council or the IS when it considers this in the August IS. So in terms of the public consultation period, we held it over 4 weeks. I believe Easter might have been in between, as well as Anzac Day. So we extended out the period. We did a very, what I'd say, pretty hard consultation process in terms of getting the message out there. You see on the screen, hard copies of all our customer service centres. We advertised through various outlets. The Mayor and I had a Facebook video on our weekly videos as well, numerous Facebook posts, and we put some banners on the entrances to the township and advertise with all our emails from staff when they go out. So a really concerted effort to get feedback. That was really successful. We had those banners on the side of this slide, a retractable banner placed at those customer service centres. I believe it was a really successful undertaking. We had 155 responses with respect to the to this consultation. The feedback was primarily through a survey monkey that we had developed, so that those links were from the Facebook or our webpage able to be accessed. We also had hard copies at customer service centres, and we really got a really good data set with some good information, which I won't spoil Alex and James's thunder in that regard, but certainly really happy with where we landed. So, Councillor Koch.
Just looking at it, one thing I thought was happening was that there was no indicative costs in the in there, and no costs of ongoing maintenance. Do you think that would have changed the responses?
Potentially. I think it was what we deliberately set up from the outset based on the process we've gone through with the members to date was trying to implement projects that weren't high cost relatively to speak to public amenity improvement per se. You don't see swathes of irrigated turf. It's really vegetation management and trees were the focus in this regard. So we listened to the members, and the members supported this kind of consultation. In terms of the cost estimates, they weren't within the regional scope of the proposal. It may have influenced it. I mean, I won't say, I'm sure it would have had a potential influence with respect to the consultation. It's something that we can consider moving forward, but these are really first order concepts and aimed at being at, I suppose, what is a sustainable level of development on our entranceways.
Keep going.
All right, next slide. I've got the counter, sorry. Oops.
It's really hard to see.
Yeah, sorry, that's just a graphic, but on that basis, I'll hand over to Alex with respect to providing an update on the public consultation.
Okay.
Great, thanks. So I think we're just going to full screen. That's right.
Oh. Did you?
That's all right. I mean, if it, yeah, I think we can go there. So as Sam said, we've got 155 responses, which is great. So it has given us a really good set of data that we can work from and extract. I'll run through all the questions, and you've got them there in front of you, and then we can talk about what they mean and where we can go forward. I think tonight is also a good opportunity for us to hear your feedback now that we've heard all the public consultation, because the next stage of the project really is to update the beautification plan based on the community consultation and your feedback. So I think, yeah, tonight will be a really good one for those open discussions, and we'll take as many notes as possible and then try and, come back with the next iteration. So question 1 was just names. Question 2 was the general age group, and I think we had 71% between 30 and 59, which is a good cross section. And typically we don't see many people, younger than 30 filling in these, but we did still get some, so that was great. Suburb of residents, so a large percentage from Gullah East and Williston made up the majority. But again, a pretty good cross section. Moving through. Question 4. So this is one of the, I guess, real questions. So this was when currently observing the actual entranceways within the town of Gullah, name the most attractive and least attractive entranceway. Now we listed the 8 entrances. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people, 41% said none of the above, and then they didn't actually write which was their most attractive or least attractive. So this question, it's hard to extract too much from that, because as you can see, such a large percentage really said, none. But what we have extracted is that the Barossa Valley Way, is attractive. The Main North Road South gets a lot of least attractive. Now, when you read the comments, a lot of it is about the artwork. And there's, I guess, a lot of negative feedback about the artwork. And this comes through as we'll see on a lot of questions, even when we're not asking about it as well. And there is some positive, but, it is a sort of a common theme that's probably worth discussing tonight. And, what can we do moving forward to address the community feedback? So looking at question 4, I'm not sure if we can delve too much into, what people are actually liking right now and what they're not liking. But when you look at the additional comments, this one, you can see that 22 people say that all entrances are unattractive. Now, at least we can only move up from here, according to these people, but it really comes down to a lack of landscaping and street trees, and that, that I guess they're perceiving a lack of green on the entrances. And then, as you can see, negative feedback regarding the existing landline artwork. Some positive as well. So question 5, what do you currently think detracts from the visual amenity of the existing entranceways? Now, if you look at this, lack of green, lack of tree planting and unstructured planting make up almost sort of 60%. So really, I kind of interpret that as really like trees and greening is one of the big things that people see lacking in the entranceways, and they think that that's one of the things that detracts from these entranceways, is that they're open without tree planting. They don't have much green, and then we get down to things that maybe we thought would be higher, like weed management and rubbish and visual. They seem to rank much lower. So although when you go out there and when we did our first, field studies, we identified a lot of just rubbish especially in the dipty areas, or the DIT, that, weren't being maintained, and that areas weren't being slashed and maintained. That seems to rank lower than maybe what we thought, according to the general public, that really they see the lack of green and the lack of tree planting as their top priorities. The unkept verges does rank 3rd, so that probably is the slashing, but some of the things like line marking as well it gets some mentions, but maybe not as much as what we first thought, so that was interesting. Question 5, additional comments. Again, lack of landscaping and street trees rated highly. then the negative feedback about the landline artwork, maintenance rubbish, and right down to lack of pedestrian paths, the rubble roundabouts from verges down lower. So yeah, sort of a general theme, but really that green is always coming up as the top priority. Question 6. What 2 beautification aspects for entranceways in the town of Gullah are most important to you? So here, 84.5% of respondents selected tree planting and landscape verges as their first or second preference. So, I think that reiterates what we're talking about in the last question. And also, I think it's a really big, tick towards what the beautification plan was actually aiming at, which is a lot of tree planting. And I think it was the last sort of workshop or presentation where we sort of made that call to direct more on the, low cost, high impact, but long lasting things like tree planting, rather than doing too much fussy little things, which I guess they do require a lot more maintenance as well. So I think gearing it towards the tree planting, we're seeing support for that in general, which is great. Moving down the general cleanliness, art and landscape features, they still rate, but you can see that undergrounding power lines and line marking and signage control rank really low as far as what the general community see as priorities for the beautification. Probably everyone's happy that undergrounding power lines is down low. So yeah, as a big ticket item as far as costs. So question 7, which aspects listed below do you believe require service level improvement in the town of Gullah? And this comes back to the maintenance. So landscape verges really is that number one. And I think we discussed that the general community don't understand the difference between DIT maintained areas and council maintained areas. So it's hard to extract, are they talking about DIT areas or are they talking about council areas? But we do know that the DIT areas are maintained, I guess, to a lower standard, really. I think that's still one we have to, discuss and work through, but the community don't really care about who's maintaining it. They see the unkept verges as an issue, yeah. And then Sam and Paul have still been working through the service levels, and we do have that as an additional appendix to the beautification plan, where we did look at costs as well, per tree planting, per mow, per slash as well. So it's certainly happening in the background, the additional costs, and we understand that it's really important. But I think for the purpose of getting the consultation moving and getting everyone to understand what we're trying to achieve, it's probably good not to put the direct maintenance costs in up front. Moving down, we then have weed management, roundabout treatments. Again, signage control and line marking right down the bottom, yeah. And art and landscape features also, I guess, ranking low, which reflective of the sort of general feedback. Question 7, additional comments now. So we had 27 additional comments. Planting, number 1, and then again, negative feedback regarding the existing landline artwork. Road resurfacing, shared paths, tree planting. When we get into the sort of 1s and 2s as far as community feedback, it is hard to kind of, interrogate each. I mean, it's good to read through all of them, but from a statistics point of view, when you start to get down into the 1s, they don't really make much difference when we're looking at the bigger charts. But that's why I guess we've provided the entire feedback. So if you do have time and want to read through, you can see those. But yeah, that's sort of how we've approached the summaries as well. Question 8. Overall, do you support the objectives and opportunities identified in the draft beautification plan? Look, we're really happy with this. 69% of people support the plan. I think that's a really good feedback for council, and putting something out there that is untested with the community as well. And yes, we've workshopped it internally, but I would see that as good support moving forward, and the fact that only 7% of respondents do not support the plan as well. So as a, I guess, collective team, we were really happy with that. Question 9. So any other comments? Now, this was where people could really write their essays and go to town. So we got, number 1 is 16 people providing additional trees. Next, 14 regarding the landline artwork, and there's certainly negative feedback, unfortunately, around that. 13 generally support the plan, which was great that people actually bothered to write they're supporting it in the additional feedback. Additional planting as well, consider maintenance and consider costs. So that's good that they actually are understanding that as well. And that, I think that, there were some comments that even talked about they liked the idea of the plan because it was simple and it was talking more about trees and less the fussy things that are higher maintenance. So some people certainly understood that. Coming down to incorporate cultural and historical interpretation, provide new gateway signage. Now, one of the changes we have made to the beautification plan is identifying, an entry statement at each of the entrances. And that's not necessarily a sign or artwork, but it's the idea of something at each of the entrances, and whether that could be feature planting or feature trees or a wall or a sign, but something that lets you know you're coming into the town. And I think there seems to be strong support for that. In the plan, we've left it open because we don't want to dictate that you have to have a certain totem sign at each one, that I think each entry is so different and so unique as well that they need to be considered. And it needs to be considered in line with the maintenance and the bigger costs. The only other comment I'll pull down there is that 3 people were critical of the limited scope of the survey. And that's because some people like open-ended questions and they love to be able to write exactly what they want on each one. That makes it really hard to interpret when we get those questions. So we were deliberately, closed in how we wanted people to answer them so we could actually get data that was useful. Those open-ended ones make it really hard to come back with, precise data that everyone here can interpret and move forward knowing that we have support or don't have support. So I think that's why we got those, those 3 people critical of the survey down the bottom. But again, it's not a huge number out of the 155 people. Generally we're pretty happy with that. So that was our collective, summary. We then have all of the comments that are unedited and, they're provided, as a separate document, and maybe we can discuss them at the end. Sounds like the best approach, but now would be a good chance to open it up to the floor, and we can discuss the beautification plan. And again, we're taking on as much feedback as possible from tonight so we can go away and update the plan.
Okay. Cody?
So would you say, based on this feedback, that, for example, we might want to consider roundabouts a lower priority than we were before?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Interestingly enough, obviously roundabouts don't feature as a higher up in the feedback. It's about the entranceways as being the main focus and wanting to improve that outlook coming into the town. So, based on what we can see here, clearly the community is looking for some change, and primarily the southern end has been the main focus that's sort of come to the fore. I think we all sort of understood that was likely to be the case, and that's what the feedback's.
You didn't really ask any questions about roundabouts though, did you? That wasn't in. So I suspect that it didn't trigger people's thought process. It was all about the entranceways and, cleanliness, what you don't like, what you do like, that type of stuff. So, if you're not embedded in the conversation here, you may not have thought about roundabouts because the process doesn't really, apart from a few pictures, it doesn't really cover that.
There were certainly comments from the community about roundabouts. You look through the free text in regards to, in terms of softening those approaches, beautifying the town, in terms of removing that hard rubble outlook. There was talk about Redbanks Road roundabout at the top end of Williston as a particularly.
Well, it looks pretty disgusting at the moment. I have to tell you.
Yeah. So that, you know, there were certainly comments about roundabouts, and they do feature in here. I've just, and maybe take your point, Madam Mayor, whether it was an actual question or not, maybe that's probably.
Well, that was certainly my observation, that, you know, the questions were very focused on the entrance ways, and how do you feed in about roundabouts unless you actually have a passion about roundabouts? That's certainly my observations. So anyway, it's a subjective sort of view. I mean, yeah, certainly I think roundabouts provide huge bang for buck if they're actually upgraded. Councillor Fraser?
It's a shame about the roundabouts, because I actually think that if we did, you know, one roundabout a year or two roundabouts a year, it would make a huge impact and people would notice it straight away, and it wouldn't be as expensive as doing a whole entrance way. So that's a shame that it wasn't, you know, mentioned quite so much, I think. I think that would have been a good way to start off. But also when you come into Gullah now from south, you pass the lights there on Trinity Drive, I think it is. We've got some tree planting happening there. It already looks fantastic, but albeit that the trees are really small. Do you know where I mean there? And you just go, wow, that's going to be a lift when they grow. And it's just a few trees, but they look really good. Yeah. So.
We do have some slides on that further on. I've got some slides further on that.
Just on the roundabouts, sorry, I wouldn't discount that the community don't want roundabouts. It's maybe we just didn't ask specifically.
Yeah.
The fact that beautification plan actually references roundabouts and has images, and the community are, you know, 70% support the beautification plan, I think that could almost say that, yeah, roundabouts would be supported. So, yeah.
Good point. And notwithstanding, additional planting as ranked highly in this regard.
Just on question 4, where the most attractive entranceways and least attractive entranceways were sort of ranked. I mean, there's two ways to look at it. The least attractive, whether they're the most important to be concentrating on, and leave the most attractive ones to last. But yeah, interesting data with Main North Road sort of coming out at 16% as the least attractive, and then Redbanks Road is the second least, which, you know, I sort of agree with. You know, things like Barossa Valley Entranceway, 18.5% think it's the most attractive. So whether, you know, we don't really need to be, you know, making that a priority, which, you know, we were already putting grant funding, which we didn't get for that. So I think the Main North Road one was the one that has always been the rubbish and the weeds and the rubbish and that sort of thing. And, you know, throwing a heap of trees in there and some understory species would green that up, and, you know, would be a really cheap process to sort of look at. And Redbanks Road, similar, you know, throwing trees and shrubs and things like that would be good.
Sort of reflects the volume of traffic. They're the most used roads in the town. So it actually fits with that usage in a way. I have to tell you though, you know, Barossa Valley Highway at 6:30 in the morning is packed. People coming from the Barossa Valley into Gullah, it's actually bumper to bumper, 6:30 in the morning. But, you know, you look at your overall usage, which you guys have, and this reflects that, I think. Yeah. You know, where people drive mostly. Who's next? Kelvin?
First of all, it's pleasing to see the good response to the survey or the consultation. I think it's a bit better than some of the other consultations we've done. So 155 odd responses and 70% or roughly 70% support for the plan. I think that proves there's support in the community for the beautification plan or the beautification of Gullah. The one question I have, Sam, is have we got the balance right in the plan in regards of capital works like the entranceways versus the service level improvement? Because, you know, in the response, I think it was that question 7 here, where it talked about, it lists all of the issues where service level needs to be considered, and they're pretty high figures in terms of what they think should be improved. So And I think back to originally when we were talking about, you know, the term road verges versus nature strips. Do we take road verges to include nature strips? You know, I mentioned before, Gullah South areas, there's many streets around there where the road verge there or the nature strip there is pretty bad, you know. There's just dirt, you know, there's nothing else there. It's not maintained and so forth. Will that sort of thing be captured in the plan, or do we need to up the ante on the service levels versus the capital works? That's the one I'm trying to juggle. Everything else I think has been covered, but yeah.
I think that's a really good question. It's one that we struggled with, and we were sort of really waiting to see what came out of the consultation in that regard. I've sort of, for the purposes of the contract with Landscape, have maintained their focus on, I suppose, landscape outcomes, and the council officer review service levels separately. So you'll see I'll talk about that a bit later on in terms of some considerations that might respond to some of the actual commentary that's been provided. And it's something that I wanted to build into the council report, get a sense of tonight, and then we can look at and I suppose bring members up to speed with some works that we're doing in this space and what are some opportunities moving forward.
I think Nathan was next. Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
So yeah, firstly, I'm sort of humbled by the response, to be honest, in comparison to other community consultation. But just on the flip side, so we're completely clear. We have a ratepayer base of 11,500. This is equivalent of 1.6 of that population. Our overall population of the town is 24,000, so it's 0.6% we've got consultation from. I reckon all the projects here and in the beautification plan have actually been done really well. I really like the look of them, and I really wish we'd be able to do them all. I do question, what if we had a beautification plan that was roundabout oriented? How would we see it come back? What if we had a beautification plan that was about open space? How would we see it come back? It'd be really, really interesting to see those figures, just because, yes, 155 is a very big response in local government. I completely agree with that. But, you know, before I start looking at this as a very valuable package and capturing that community sentiment, I'm more like, I want to see 10%. And I know that doesn't align with what we normally get. But yeah, it's just some of these figures, we are capturing that positive feedback. I get that. And the 70% of the 155, I'm a little bit skeptical, to be honest, because the community consultation, the way that it goes and the feedback that we're receiving, I mean, all elected members probably agree, the rusty shovels, we all hear it. You know, that's majority of the conversations we have with a lot of ratepayers. Now, are we going to now do another project that people are going to turn around and say, well, if you're going to spend that money, we need to spend it here? That's where I sort of, I worry. And again, call me skeptical, but I really like the projects in here, but putting them ahead of some other items that we haven't teased out is where I get a little bit worried. So that's sort of where I'm sitting at the moment. Very well presented. I really liked the effort that was put into the community consultation. It is listening to some of the feedback that I think we've been given, and we are amping it up. It's just that when we talk about 3 people have said critical of the limited scope, well, that's actually as a percentage more of the 150 than the overall. Is that sort of making sense? Like I said, I'm not against it. I'm just not full steam ahead with the numbers yet.
I mean, they're all really good comments back, and I think that we want everyone to feed back, but not everyone is as passionate as we are, for obvious reasons. They've got busy lives, etc. So I think it's reasonable feedback, but I hear what you're saying, because you have to also put it into perspective, and ultimately we've been elected into these positions to make decisions on behalf of the community. That's our job. So we do take this on board, but we also put it into perspective. And I think that's what you're saying. We have to put it into perspective and look at our other priorities, and also, you know, use this consultation and try and make sense of it within reason. Yeah. Now, I think Paul was next, and then I'll go back to you, Cody.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this. Yeah, a lot of this is on DIT land, isn't it? A lot of it's all DIT land, a lot of it, most of it. Southern, entry into the Barossa, northern, right. What consultation have we had with DIT so far? In particular, if we start planting in those areas, I'd assume we'd have to take over the maintenance regime, because they're at level, you know, they would mow it twice a year with slasher, and we would then have to mow it, you know, the service level would have to go up with the front deck, for example. So how have we working with them? Because all I can see is our maintenance costs going through the roof.
Through you, Mayor. There has been limited consultation with DIT to date with respect to this plan, but on the basis that this has been an undertaking that's occurred widely across the state in terms of being able to plant in those areas. I think there is, you are right, Councillor Koch, in raising that, you know, do we then have an obligation to take over the maintenance of those areas because they're currently being maintained by them under contract? It depends on the level of the proposal being undertaken. If it was just tree planting per se, no different than the trees that are planted out there now in a more formalised manner, it's actually going to make maintenance a whole lot easier for them. So in terms, from my perspective and my view, is that the only increase in service level that would be attributable to council would be the cost of managing those trees. At the moment, it's a bit of a no man's land. It's the DIT are responsible for vegetation management, but they do. The service level is nil. It's sight lines. So unless it's impacting a vehicle sightline, they don't prune the tree. If the tree falls over, and they are obligated to remove it, but effectively that, in terms of the priority of that undertaking, is quite low. So effectively there would be an increase, but the increase would be as it relates to council picking up the vegetation management of the trees. I see the actual slashing that would occur would still remain with DIT, unless we were looking at some specific understory planting at the time that we further designed up these concepts based on what the council was seeking. But that's probably not what we're proposing as part of this, and not the examples that we previously showed in other jurisdictions that planted, you know, mass plantings in this area that allowed for easy maintenance with a rider mower. Wollonga Avenue being the example that comes to mind. Yeah.
I'll go to Cody, and then I'll go to you. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just looking at this, who responded and all that kind of thing. Do we have a general idea of, like, because obviously Gullah East provided 33%, and then Evanston and Evanston Gardens between them provided 9%.
It's almost reflective of how people vote in local government elections. So I was just looking at that.
My thoughts around that is that does look similar to the ratio of people who show up for, you know, voting and that sort of thing. But I'm not sure if that's.
It's just a guess. But
and there's an other category. Does that mean outside of town of Gullah, or is?
Where are you looking, Cody?
This is page. This one,
pie graph,
the one that's up on the screen.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
Because apart from these suburbs, it's just Cudlah, right? Is Cudlah other, or is other people outside of the town of Gullah?
I'll just speak, the consultants were just saying that it was effectively either they didn't disclose or it was outside of town of Gullah.
So you could decide what you think about that. What do you think about that?
About this in general?
Yeah, other.
Other?
They don't live in Gullah.
Yeah, I was just curious of what other could mean, because...
but it also could mean that people are interested and they take an interest. It could be, who has have a connection and they don't want to disclose. If we want to be, you know, kind, I'm sure they're not doing it just to, be divisive. I think they're probably interested, but then, it's a bit of a mystery, isn't it? Councillor Fraser.
I just have a bit of a question to Nathan about his percentages, because I really think the percentages should be worked on residents rather than population. Because, you know, in a household, you've got people from, you know, all ages. You might only get one input from that house. So I think your percentages should be really worked out on residents rather than population. But, yeah, but then even a ratepayer, that's one household. Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep. Kel?
Just a quick comment on why he's disappeared. Paul's comment about the dit land, that argument, as I said before, that argument's been going on for so long now. The last 40 years, this is a good opportunity to get some of those areas upgraded and improved. If we get back into the argument, it's their land or it's our land or whatever, nothing will happen again, as it hasn't happened for the last 40 years. So I think this is a good compromise, because as Sam said, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean we're taking the whole thing over. It just makes the maintenance of those areas easier, and it certainly improves them. So yeah, I fully support it. Nathan, about the response rate, I can understand what you're saying about the figures, but you know, this is a pretty good response, I think, in terms of numbers for public consultation. Be interested to hear from you guys for other council areas when you've done this sort of thing, what sort of response you've got.
That's probably a good question for the consultants, just to put it into perspective.
Yeah, this is a good feedback. Look, 150 seems to be about the mark that we usually aim for. Just did one for Jamestown for Eyre Street, and we had 150, I think, bang on. For some
That's
of
the whole town, isn't it?
Yeah. And
it's a little bit more than 10%.
Yeah, and sometimes those smaller towns are easier to get everyone. Look, the biggest we've ever had was Jetty Road in Glenelg, where I think we had sort of 300. The lowest we've had is when we do work in Adelaide City Council or City of Adelaide, because people are sort of disconnected a little bit, and and you might only get, you know, 30 or 40, and you think, you know, really, and they put so much money into going out to consultation, and there are huge events, and you're still not getting great numbers. So I think for the how much, you know, has been invested, and it's being done really efficiently as well. I think 150 is good feedback, and it's given us good data, which is what we want. And I guess you do have to be realistic that it is hard getting people to fill in forms and, you know, respond back to when everyone's so busy. So I think the more you can also speak to people and bring that feedback back to the chamber as well, that's also really useful as well, when you bump into people and ask those questions. And so, you know, it's not just the survey, but the surveys are really useful.
Yeah, it is. I like your comment, Sam, about just planting some trees, but also working with DIT so they still maintain, because I think there does need to be a balance. You know, you can have a hands-off approach and nothing gets done, but you don't want to take over full maintenance. That would be such a huge cost. And I think people would then feed back very strongly about why their rates have gone up so much, and there'd be a bit of an outcry in that regard. So I think there does need to be a bit of a balance of how we can beautify, but also get that bang for buck. And I tend to agree with Councillor Fraser about roundabouts. You see some really well constructed roundabouts. There's really interesting things you can do that make a big difference, even things like fencing. You look at the caravan park, that caravan park fence was designed by Judy Ferguson when she was on council, and that's just a colour-bond fence, but it's actually a really interesting fence, and you can do things with existing structures or to make them look interesting, not necessarily cost you anymore. So yeah, there's interesting design techniques that you can do, and that fence is a really good example of that. Anyway, yes, sure.
As Sam said before, there are some relatively low-cost items in this plan, like, for example, the entrance, Ryde Street entrance coming up from the roundabout down the bottom. Plan simply proposes an avenue of trees and a bit of tidying up on the road verge. Simple as that, and yet it would make it look so much better. Similar to Dawson Road, is it? Where it's got the avenue of eucalypts down there. Things like that are just,
You've got to get the trees to grow.
You do, yeah.
And, you know, I can tell you in my street in Williston, we're having all sorts of trouble trying to get trees that have been replanted to grow. So you do have to be careful before you pull out perfectly serviceable trees and then plant different trees that may take 10 or 15 years.
Well, in this case, there's no trees there, so
there's those big pine trees, but then there's that empty, but it lends itself, doesn't it? Mm. Yeah. Di?
Yeah, just a question. This morning I was walking along the river walk, and the trees or the shrubs that have been planted there, the little tiny ones, what percentage of those do we get? What percentage die? What percentage keeps up? Because they're obviously, you don't go along and water them all, so they have to look after themselves. So.
This is the revegetation projects. I think we've had varying degrees of success over the years. Some have been really successful. I think success is 90% plus. I think that's something that we'd be seeking. Councillor Kosh has got a lot of background in this space, and obviously Councillor Hughes, but certainly 90% is something that we'd see big as a number of success. We have had some work that we've done that's been really successful and others that haven't. I think we've learned from those that we haven't, and now we've got some structured maintenance programs in place. We're maintaining them for a period of 2 years, and with watering, I think that's really key to help them establish.
In Clonley Park, there's a little sort of test garden, isn't there, of different plants and different biodiversity. And biodiversity, I think, is really, really important in Gullah. You want different birds. You want to see many different species of birds. You want to see lizards. If you don't have enough native biodiversity, you won't get those. You won't get those birds. And I think they're really an important part of Gullah. Councillor Hughes?
Yeah, I think our native environments are really important, and it's also bees and you know, the native bee hotels and things like that are sort of getting room. But yeah, planting in May, June, not August, September. I think Gullah Council did get caught a couple of times when they planted really late. In our seasons now, with our weather conditions, you really have to plant in May and June, and you get the winter rainfall and a lot of establishments. So it's made a huge difference in survival rates by planting early, and I think council's been doing that now, which is really good. But yeah, local species are also really tough as well, and we do have local callicimans. You don't always have to use the Gullah hybrid bottle brush. There are local native callistamin bottle brushes that are really hardy and really strong and look really good. And if they have to be, they can be pruned and stuff like that as well, or even hedged. So we do have a lot of local native shrubs and things like that would really do really well on our roadsides. Even native Christmas bushes and all sorts of things that flower at Christmas time, and plants that really do add to that biodiversity and species richness. And I think a lot of that is an education process where, and a lot of the native grasses are actually green over summer as well. So you do get that natural green tinge really strongly with certain native grasses. They really are green. It's really the only green grasses. They also are things that really slow down fires and things like that. The native species, where the introduced species and the wild oats and things like that, it's really easy for those plants to catch the light, and also for fires to spread really quickly, like pinery fire and things like that, where when those fires, fast-moving fires, hit native vegetation, they slow right down. They don't burn as fast.
Yeah, that was part of the problem with pinery, where there wasn't any native vegetation along the roads, and there's nothing to stop it until it hit the Sturt Highway or Roseworthy. Councillor Kosh.
Add to that, I went to the Green Adelaide consultation on their plan, and one of the elements they're talking about is a wilder Adelaide. It's not actually rewilding like they're doing on the York Peninsula, but just putting in the native species, and particularly looking at local provenance. That's the key. So plants that are indigenous to, say, a 12 or 15k area circumference radius, because that's the plants that are genetically adapted to your climate and soils. So you need to use local provenance. Also with the native grasses, they're good, especially in summer, because they're what's called intertussock spaces, and that's the gaps between the grasses. So when a fire comes...
What's that word?
Intertussock spaces. So what happens is when the fire comes, it can't spread because you've got gaps between the grasses, and then in winter, those gaps are filled by native daisies, for example. So it's a wonderful system if you can get it going. It's fantastic. Yep.
Sam?
There is more to the presentation that quite a bit more.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
if we
keep
can,
going.
if you
Yes,
just
keep going.
keep going.
Yeah.
Get Dale to go back. All right. So in terms of, you know, we've got that feedback. What is the response to some of that feedback? I'm really interested to hear the members' views in this space, and really even further discussion maybe at this point in regards to service levels. Some of the take-home points that we're sort of, you know, extracting: rubbish, and I think that's been discussed. We do have, at the moment, the process for collecting rubbish is we have community offenders. So the correctional services have a community offenders program. We have a $10,000 budget that pays for effectively 35 visitations a year by a busload of, what's the word? Well, community offenders, criminals, not work experience.
Community offenders.
Community offenders.
Community service.
Community service, that's it. Community service is the word. And effectively, that's quite successful. And we spread them across the town in different elements. Williston Cemetery, we spend some time along the rubbish removals every month at the various entries. But we can increase that allocation. We can get more bang for our buck. Effectively, we pay $300 a day, and that pays for potentially 3 to 6 adults collecting rubbish.
Yeah,
and the quantum
really
is
good
quite
cost-effective
significant.
Program, isn't it? Did you want to say something, Councillor Hughes, to that?
Just wondering whether DIP could be even approached to pay or contribute to the program, because it could be, they do actually have environmental funds and funding areas, and they could put $10,000 towards the offenders, because a lot of the cleanup is actually on that entrance and those entrance ways.
Has that ever, because I've actually spoken to the minister, I got a meeting with the minister on, and he was doing it the day I had the meeting with him, which was really quite interesting, wasn't it, Sam? Yeah. Which was fine, better late than never. 18 months of wrangling, and we finally got a meeting, and they actually have been doing a better job by my observations, Sam.
Yeah, and I've got a point up there in that regard. So DIP maintenance, yes, technically they need to pick up the rubbish before they mow over the top of it, for instance, and that's something that we're holding them to account for. But effectively, where and that's, tyres and dumped rubbish per se, and they do collect that. I think it's a smaller piece and fragments. They just don't have that level of service. So, is that the question for Councillor Hughes? Can we approach DIP? Yeah, we certainly can. There may be an access to a funding arrangement I'm not aware of, but certainly it's an opportunity to partner with them in that regard to potentially increase the frequency and service level.
Councillor Fraser.
I did notice when I lived up at Gullah East, and I'd be walking around there, as soon as you got over, as you're going out of town, as soon as you got over Cheek Avenue, it's like people had bought their takeaway and they got that far and there was nobody around, so they just chuck it out the window. So all the way along that road from Cheek Avenue to Sunnydale, in the bushes, you just see all this rubbish. It was terrible. And I guess it's like that on most of the exits out of town where they've bought takeaway and they're eating it, and they've, instead of leaving it in their car, they just chuck it out the window as soon as they get on their way out of town. So it causes a huge problem.
They do it along the Gullah East Link Road too. I can see that every Monday when I walk along there. Lots of things chucked that perhaps shouldn't be chucked. Yeah, people do tend to litter if they think they can get away with it. Yeah. Sam, keep going.
Yeah, so that rubbish you were seeing is a focus, and how we can maybe improve the frequency of rubbish collection, on particularly those main entries. Increase Main Street, whilst this multi-level car park didn't particularly come through, but street sweeping, and some Main Street comments came through, but and that sort of goes to some of the weed management as well. One of the, sorry, Councillor Koch, I'll just talk and then I'll pass on.
Might get through this slide and then I'll take your question.
Yep.
You can.
So in terms of we're actually out at the moment to tender for our street sweeping contract. We've gone out on the regional approach with Adelaide Plains Council and Light Regional Council. And we're hoping to get some efficiencies through that broader procurement. And it's an opportunity to review the service level. And I've got some considerations further on in terms of what we're proposing in that regard. But with that comes a more deeper clean of the main street. One of the key things that we've picked up is sweeping around some of the medians around that are actually in the centre of roads that aren't currently swept, and they build up debris, and that debris harbours enough substance to grow weeds, for instance. That means more weed spraying and then dead weeds. So that's part of the thinking in that regard. The service level increases, and something that we've certainly picked up through the landscape irrigation management plan, although it's below the bid, is returning some of these dryland grass areas to irrigated green spaces. That was some of the feedback. Again, the members considered it. It's currently below the line, but it's an opportunity. The beautification projects, currently there's $150,000 in the draft budget to progress an option or options. That's something I'm really interested in, and I'm hoping that when we bring this back to the IES in August, we can sort of make some decisions as if it does get endorsed by the council, which project or project should we throw that money towards in terms so we can get on with designing and delivering it. In terms of the dip maintenance contract, Madam Mayor, they have got new contractors in place. We have been very vocal and banging the door from the top, through to the lower ranks of the business. Dale, as our business support officer, he's on the phone to them, in terms of calling through various issues that in terms of response. And to be honest, it's been a significant turnaround from where it was a year ago. We rang in a light pole that had been damaged at the Williston roundabout and knocked over giveaway sign, and within a few days the whole thing had been repaired. Are
they going to resurface Red Banks Road at any point and fix the burst main that was flooding with water today and the weekend? No? As a result of their work that they've been doing?
I can't get a response with respect to the resealing, Madam Mayor. I'm still banging that door. And
well, I'm hoping because they actually didn't connect the water pipes properly and it burst the water main, that they'll actually come back and do it properly. That's what I'm hoping, but who knows?
We are progressing that one separately, but in terms of dip maintenance, I think it's from our perspective, we need to be on them, and we need to be on them, making sure that we're not forgotten and that we're not going to accept what's been served up previously. There's been some change in that space. They're resourcing it better, and it appears that for the time being, touch wood, the township's being serviced the way that their service levels dictate we should be.
It's a lot better than what it was. Yeah. Councillor Koch, yes, you've been waiting patiently.
Just on the street sweeping, has there been any thought about purchasing a street sweeper? Because that comes up all the time about keeping the streets clean. Because I know when I worked at the Barossa, we had our own sweeper. It was flat out all the time, and we contracted it out as well. So, yeah.
Through the Mayor, we haven't progressed the consideration of council procuring one. I know generally you find the councils are 50-50 as to whether they're in or they're out in terms of a contract or have them in. I know with respect to street sweeping, it comes down to the efficiency of, if you have one, whether your township can cater for one or two. As soon as you get into the half realm, that's where you lose efficiency with respect to the actual sweeper itself and the costs. They're very costly pieces of plant to both buy and maintain, and hence why 50% of councils generally outsource it. There's probably an opportunity to have a conversation with council when we bring back the tender, because it will be coming back to council because of the value and the fact that I'm looking to change some service levels. So it would be interesting to see that conversation. We might actually reflect on that point that you've made, Councillor Koch, and think about how we might be able to provide some data in that regard.
Deputy Mayor, you haven't spoken yet. Yeah, I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you.
I didn't have my hand up. Oh, anyway, now that I've got a chance, I'm just sitting here thinking that Kelvin, first of all, threw it in the ring along with Diane about the roundabouts. I mean, you know, we've got to start somewhere for the public to start to come back and say, yes, council's making good decisions, you know, with this plan. I agree with Nathan. It looks good, there's no doubt about it. And I read things like, you know, no roundabouts fitting in there at all. And when you look at the roundabouts that we as this council put in, they all work. You know, when we talked about putting them in, everybody said, nah, what are you going to do that for? But they do work, and they work successfully. The one that comes to my mind, which Kelvin really started the ball rolling, was the Ride Street one. It's so easy. I could go over there tomorrow morning and plant it full of pig face. You know what I mean? It's that easy. We've got to start somewhere so that the public can see it. They say, we're doing something now. And, you know, I would hate to think that's the last project that's going to be done or whatever. The other thing about trees, we've got the tree expert across from me and that sort of stuff. And certainly in Gullah, the Gullah hybrid bottle brush, and I notice there's quite a lot of comments about the Gullah hybrid. It was introduced because Mr. Harkness and the mother tree of the hybrid bottle brush is still alive over in Gullah Terrace next to the railway station. And so it was Gullah's tree. That's why it's called Gullah hybrid bottle brush, and there was others on from that. And it was always said, if you want that tree to look beautiful, you must prune it regularly. Now, what we seem to do here is plant trees and we let them go wild and they fall to bits, like melaleucas and things like that. Now, if you want to go and see one of our staff's fathers, a street up in Gullah East, and we walked along there the other day and Glenna said to me, she said, have a look at that. That is absolutely, the whole street is Gullah hybrid bottle brush. It's pruned regularly and all that sort of stuff. And in front of my place, they're pruned regularly by a fellow that knows what he's doing, Adrian Fisher. And they can be really kept and looked after. If you let them go willy-nilly, they fall to pieces. So, you know, as said in this report here about Burra, for instance, you know, the jacaranda trees, wow, they look beautiful. But it also says in the comments, and I think as Paul would say too, we should try to get a tree like a prunus or whatever that's got colour the whole year round, that doesn't lose its leaves like the bottle brush does and blocks up all our gutters and things like that. So whatever we make a decision on, and these reports certainly help, it's very, very hard to find a street tree that's going to be there and lack of maintenance and things like that, that's going to look really pretty and make our town look good. The last thing to say, to do with the developers, you know, whether it be, I won't name any names, and that sort of thing. There's no rulings that says, we'd love you to plant some trees in your yard. And, you know, like you only got to go up the top of the hill and look out over and you sort of think to yourself, well, how come there's no trees in around those houses? So there's another area there where I think we've got to look at if this beautification program is going to work successfully, and the people that are driving around, you know, now over 100,000 people a day come to this town and so forth. Now, if we had 40,000 of those and said, oh, do you see what they're doing at Kelvin's roundabout down there? You know, look, it's starting to look really nice and everything.
You're going to get your name on it.
We've got to start somewhere where all of a sudden there's a real image starting to change, you know, and that sort of stuff. And so for what it's worth, you know, I was listening about the roundabouts and, you know, Coleman Parade roundabouts have got to be the worst in South Australia. I mean, they're not bad if you lift them off over the top, but the trucks do that, you know, and I mean, they're stupid roundabouts, but everywhere else where this council has put roundabouts, whether it's on High Street, Cowton Road, all those, they work. And I'm a little bit surprised that we didn't look at a few more roundabouts around the area, not only to slow the cars down, but to keep the traffic flowing. There should be a roundabout over there at Adelaide Road in front of Mitre 10, and I'm just stunned that this is not going to be. So, yep, I like the program. I'm interested in hearing what's been said about it, and very good comments from Nathan and a few others. Thank you.
Okay, Nathan.
Firstly, thanks for the special mention there, Brian. So I guess the list that is up on this slide, I'm really glad that we're able to see this. I guess this sort of plays into the point I was trying to make before. Good plan focuses on entrance statements. Where are we picking up, I think, the fundamentals that Kelvin first brought the plan to council because of? I've listened to Kelvin deliver this over the last couple of years, and you know, he's done a good job in being consistent in sort of pointing out the same things that ratepayers point out to, I'm sure, all of us in the room. And that's around, you know, street sweeping, that's around cleaner town centres, and we are picking up on these points. My question, I guess, with the beautification projects, the 150, and then given the, let's say, for argument's sake, the 155, which I do agree is strong in the local government sphere, just to make that clear, says we need to plant more trees. What if we did say 150,000 goes to not one project, it's actually scattered throughout the town? I reckon that would be a fantastic spend, and it would see the numbers equally sort of represented. If that, yeah, I think that would be a smart move. I guess with the 150K, and then Sam, just picking up on what you're saying, the service level increases, are you saying you want some of that 150K for that, or are you talking about finding that elsewhere? Also noting that it's looking like the 534,000 that we earmarked for the Barossa Valley will probably drop below, given it doesn't seem as high on the priority. What's your sort of take on that?
Sam.
Yeah, so I think today this is a good opportunity to have a conversation in regards to service levels. As it relates to the 150, that's capital cost. We know in local government sort of finance world, we've got the capital and then operating costs. So if we were to, they're treated differently. This is as it relates to capital, so we couldn't throw it to service levels specifically. What I'm proposing with the street sweeping, just for example, is potentially lowering some service levels in some places and increasing in others, and hoping that we can get a better procurement outcome as well by bulk procuring and going for a longer length of contract tenure. So that's what we're currently working through, and so that's hoping that we don't end up with a budget impact, and if we do, well, then we need to consider our merits associated with everything else in the budget. So that's, I suppose, one point of school of thought. In regards to that beautification projects, I'm interested in some discussion today, and then we'll go away and distill that in terms of how we might be able to progress. But I know one roundabout is generally a $40,000 to $60,000 operation. We've costed them. We've costed every roundabout in this particular beautification plan, very different sizes, hence the range of costs. And that's all based on having, you know, an irrigation system installed to make sure they actually do physically look green and survive our harsh summers per se. So there are, so that's just an example. And then how we might spread that around, I think that's something that we'll think about.
I quite like the idea of spreading that money around so you get a bit of bang for a buck, but I guess it depends on how far you can make the money spread without it looking like you've done nothing. So you have to have some impact. What does that look like? Debt reduction, yeah. Anyway, yeah. But I think hearing around the table, you know, what opportunities are there? What does that 150 look like? What does Nathan's sort of version look like? What does a roundabout look like? Can we get 2 roundabouts? What are the options that we have that might really trigger some interesting discussion at that IES meeting? Yeah.
I'll take that away. And the other thing that we haven't spoke about was weed spraying. We haven't looked at weed spraying contract for a number of years per se. There is an opportunity there to see if we could look at procurement efficiencies, packaging up. I know we haven't had much buy-in with our regional partners, councils, in respect to bulk procurement opportunity, but that is certainly one that we could look at based on this feedback and how we might look to potentially extend outcomes through procurement efficiency.
Any comments around weed spraying? No? Keep going, Sam.
All right, I've got some pretty pictures, actually.
Oh, nice.
So I'll get you to,
That's
we'll
not a
talk about this
pretty
quickly.
picture.
I won't go through in great detail, but this is basically,
Deep cleaning.
this is something that some of the things that we're looking at the moment with respect to the street sweeping tender. I won't go through each of these in individual, but you'll see where there's an arrow down, it's a service level reduction. Where there's an arrow up, it's a service level increase, and where there's an equal sign, we're proposing they stay the same. So that's a bit of work that we're doing in the background that's informed the current tender, and we'll bring a position back to the council in the coming months in that regard. Once that process has come to an end, it's just hit the market, I think last week from memory. And you'll note that the image to the side, we had some trials done at and we presented that information at the last December IES, just some on the main street, and we had some fantastic outcomes with some of the machines that are available, very cost efficient in removing chewing gum, and then the ongoing management through the smaller unit.
Councillor Kosh?
Side entry pits, that's that once every 2 years per pit. Current frequency 0.5 annually. Is that every 2 years you clean a side entry pit?
I know we have an annual side entry pit cleaning. Oh, sorry, biannual. It is. Sorry, Dives a little bit. It's biannual.
Every 2 years.
Okay, every
That's
2
what
years.
I mean. Yeah, it's every 2 years. That's not very high.
That's our current service level.
Okay.
No.
So if you had your own street sweep, you could do that more.
Kelvin?
Yeah.
Sam, I've spoken to you about this before, about footpath cleaning, sweeping or cleaning of footpaths. Can you confirm we're not doing anything, or if there's a scope to include that?
Whereabouts, which footpaths in the main street or everywhere? Council goes along and cleans it. In what way? In what way?
So can I answer that?
Yeah.
The council doesn't have a dedicated footpath sweeping program. I know that some metro councils do, albeit I'm not sure whether they did. I don't know if they still do. Effectively, there are in our CBD, we do have some, we do clean or blow some of the footpaths, and we are picking that up with this process. And there'll be some information presented at the council meeting how we're looking at potentially increasing some service levels, particularly along Julian Terrace per se. With respect to our shared paths, we do blow the shared paths, particularly we try and get there. I think it was referenced up on the slide somewhere, the shared paths. The bottom point. We ideally aim monthly, but we just can't get there with the resources that we have all the time. We are seeking to incorporate this within the tender, and we'll see what that comes back at. But effectively, that is the only, I suppose, path that we frequent on a regular basis to blow it clear.
Councillor Davies?
So the multi-storey car park, so when you say deep clean there, is that going to be like properly going at it with the hose and that sort of thing, and not just sweeping?
Yeah, so there's effectively this machine that provides will clean the surface, but this is specifically referencing the cleaning of the staircase per se.
Well, that's where I hear the most smell complaints.
Yeah. So we have done some cleaning of that recently per se, and effectively seeking to formalise that in an ongoing contract arrangement.
Nathan?
Just on the main street, we haven't sealed that concrete since it's been polished, or has that been sealed?
Yeah. No. So just on that seal, I mean, just with the experience with polished concrete that I've had, if you seal it, it is easier to maintain. Is that your takeaway as well? We've been doing a number of trials in that regard. We actually have sealed some sections of the main street footpath, and to be honest, we've found that hasn't made much difference at all.
Because you don't do the anti-slip as well, I guess. Yeah.
So we've actually, if we can get the outcome that we're hoping for, there is one unit, I think it's a $500,000 unit, that does an amazing job at very cost effective and is playing in this street sweeping space. And we're hoping that we can either get with a tender or multiple tenders combining together to actually give us a really good outcome in that space.
I think that it's clear that the main street needs a deep clean. But it's a bit like looking after your front garden. Some people will look after it, some people won't, because they don't think it's their responsibility. How do you actually encourage people to look after their verges? We don't, I'd really like to see some sort of engagement there, and that includes business owners who have cafes and cleaning out the front so that you don't get that build up of grime and grease from the food that's dropped, and that would go a long way to saving enormous amounts of money if we could engage with them. But I don't know what the solution is, because people don't want to do that anymore, do they?
It's a difficult one, Madam Mayor. There's certainly not a lot of assistance provided in that space. So I think having the deep clean, I think we do allow money in the budget for that, and we do have a service that we contract out, but we have since found something that's very cost effective with the funding that we have available. So to get a better outcome.
Yeah.
We'll just keep.
I have to say, I mean, some verges look good with rubble and crushed marble, or with a nice tree in the middle of them. And around some areas of Williston, in fact, further up my street, it's a really good example of, I think it's just gravel and a tree, and it looks fabulous. Just looks fabulous. So easy to maintain. Nothing wrong with it. So I guess you depending on the verge, if it's neat and tidy, you don't necessarily have to have grass and mown grass. You can have different kinds of treatments that I think are quite cost effective in our environment. Yeah.
Yep. Just keep moving. So certainly opportunities. This might go to some of the we spoke about earlier. Potentially, implement some of the priority town entry upgrades, subject to final cost, but that's something we can bring back to the council in August. A better understanding in that regard. Some additional tree planting, new irrigation, landscape irrigation roundabouts, and I suppose the elephant in the room is an entry statement. That wasn't something that we set out to necessarily get correspondence on, but it was certainly something that we got a lot of feedback on, and the commentary that's provided.
The original plan was an extensive landscaping, and that was thrown out.
Correct.
Do we go back to the original landscape plan, which was quite intensive?
From memory, Madam Mayor, that was just to give you some context, I believe that was about $400,000. Stone, intricate stone, landscape.
Looked amazing, but expensive.
Irrigation, lighting. So there was about a $400,000 element, and we funded $16,000 round one when we went to actually implement with the hand. It might have been less than that, hand seeded, and the hand seed, fair to say, didn't take. We went through round two in 2021, I believe, and that was very successful. We actually planted every square metre a tube stock plant, and then hand watered it, and they've taken off and been quite effective in that regard. But do we then have to come back again, or do we let it mature over the coming 1, 2, 3 years, and then reassess whether we actually do anything in that location?
I think we've got to give it a go. We've spent some money. They are growing. They're growing really well. They're grasses. Not everybody likes grasses. Kangaroos like grass. Lizards like grass. I'm a fan of lizards. I think they're fabulous from a biodiversity point of view. Kids love lizards. They love kangaroos. I'm glad that they're growing. I mean, they're not manicured, but you got to pay a lot of money to get that look. Is that where we want to spend our money, or can we actually, spread that 150,000 around, focus on particular areas, and do that over successive years, so that we actually have a bit of a plan of beautification and we achieve the aim? Because I think what would be real shame, we've got 155 people fed back, and there's been a range of different comments, which I think is useful and helpful. and how we actually deliver on that, which I think is quite important. Yeah, I was really pleased to see not to plant baobab trees. That's fabulous. Really, they look really good in Broome and Tunnel Creek. There's lots up there, yeah, not sure about here, but there you go.
So if there's no other comments about the southern entry, happy to keep moving. Otherwise, yep.
Oh, yep, yep.
Yeah, look, I think we just need to be a little bit careful in not providing a bit of communication or commentary around that entrance statement, because yes, we have captured some numbers here, and you know, if you go to the last page, you've got 14 people, which in 150 is a good percentage, and then it also plays into us as elected members, the conversations that we have out in the community. As the Mayor pointed out before, you know, we are to represent the community. To not show any action or show the reason there is no action is shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit, I think. So we need to, how we approach what we've found, I think we need to be cautious, because it is a sticking point. A lot of the people I talk to is around, I mean, again, this might become from an uneducated background, but it's around stop spending money on these things. Get it right, stop spending money. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that commentary, and I think it comes from a place of maybe being misinformed. But because now we've brought this into the forefront of the community again, we need to make sure that we do communicate why something is going to be that way. I'm not saying spend all the 150,000 on it by any means. And I, again, sort of really would like to reiterate that if we did come to some sort of plan of the IES or whatever, and we said, these look like the top 4 priority projects, and then divvying up that 150, I'd be really interested to see how that would come about, especially with Sam and the team working on the surface levels as well. So that's only my comment on the southern.
Councillor Kosh and Councillor Davies.
Just want to clarify, the southern entry, are you talking about the dit land, are you? So we're looking at putting some trees in there, is that the idea? Or is it just the
sorry, as a relate.
Is it under the bridge? Is that where you're talking, where it goes up?
Is it, are you just looking at trees?
So just to clarify, the last dot point relates to the landline sculpture,
Okay.
southern entry statement.
Right. So
Yep.
what's the possibility of putting irrigation on there? For example, running a high pressure line across under the road through the culvert, and just using inline drippers.
Anything's possible.
Yeah, anything's possible.
We could certainly irrigate it.
Yes.
We did discuss with Landscape what are some opportunities there that could potentially we could do, and we did think maybe I did prompt Alex.
Yeah. And I guess this was after reading all the feedback, and I guess we're conscious of throwing more money at something that people already are concerned how much money, and so look, we threw around a fair few ideas, but one idea which I actually think is really simple in line with the beautification plan is just plant trees along the backside of it, so they don't stand out in this open kind of, roadway. And I think that's part of the problem. They kind of, I think there used to be trees there and now there are no trees and they sort of stand out. So it might sort of bring that woodland feel a little bit more, that, the artwork sits within a bigger landscape setting rather than being the dominant thing. So tree planting, cheap, effective, it's actually easier to water because you go along and water individual trees. And I think that could be something that, we could easily look at within the beautification plan. Yeah. Yeah. And it's also not disturbing the existing artwork, because I think that would also, we'd certainly, I'm not suggesting that of, altering or changing that. It's really just building on the overall landscape and the greening and beautification. And a lot of people have just talked about, everyone values how important trees are now, especially with climate change. And, why would anyone be opposed to planting more trees, really? Yeah.
Just on the irrigation, I'm a bit curious, and
I'm into not irrigating things, but I do understand that people like to see greenness during the middle of summer. That's just the way the world is in Australia. So for me, having that irrigated over summer wouldn't be too bad, in my opinion.
I'll just make the comment about trees in Gullah. When you come down One Tree Hill Road and you look across, all you see is trees. So we actually have quite a lot of trees. The issue with the trees is a lot of those trees are on private land. That's our issue, because over time, as more infill occurs, they will go. And so that's our dilemma, how we actually manage that. But when you come down currently, the place is covered in trees, and really big trees as well. So I think we're well served with tree cover currently, but long term, that may well change, because most trees are on private land, and that's right across Adelaide. Most trees are on private land, and that's the challenge. Councillor Davies?
Yeah, look, I agree that I think communication around those sculptures at the very least would be quite helpful. I think if you put out a survey asking people what they think of the landline sculptures, no one would respond because they don't know what that is. I've heard about 5 names for it and they all start with Rusty. But, you know, if we want to say there is a story there, or there is we want to sort of be proud of this, or something, maybe that's a communication thing that goes, a little flyer in the rates notice, or something about here's the history of this, or, because I think as it is right now, we're sort of just in a place where people look at it and it's just sort of symbolic of what it symbolises to them is that council's spending money on that and not on their footpaths. And I'm not, I think there's more we could do with it on planting trees and that sort of thing, but also just a communication side of things.
Nathan? All right, okay, yeah. Any other discussion? Do you want to keep going, Sam?
Yes.
Maybe to Sam, you always scare me when you tell me how much roundabouts cost and everything, but the roundabouts on the new superhighway out here and that sort of thing, they are just fantastic. I stopped the other day and had a look at it because there was a wheel cap in the middle and I wanted that wheel cap. But without a doubt, it's fantastic. So how can something like that cost the figures? I mean, like I remember years ago, Councillor Tom at the time went to Europe, and all over Europe, there was no mounded roundabout. They were all painted and they all worked. Has that ever been tried in South Australia, a painted roundabout?
They're a lot smaller.
You know
too,
what I mean?
aren't they?
Instead of a raised roundabout, actually painted lines, because they tell me they're in Sydney, so I haven't been there to see it. But, most people follow the white lines nowadays, and if there's a painted roundabout, would that work? I mean, you're certainly not talking anywhere near the expense other than a bit of white paint.
There are standards that need to be followed in that regard. I'm not aware of whether South Australians Code of Technical Requirements does allow for that. It's something I might have to take on notice. Councillor Sam?
No, that's right. But what about I'm talking about Kelvin's roundabout, the Rye Street one. To do what's been done up here at One Tree Hill Road. I mean, that is just brilliant. And how hard would that be to put there? I don't think that's on Dripper up there.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
Yeah.
Oh, big pardon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the costs are within that $40,000 to $60,000 range, and so that we could deliver an outcome in that roundabout. And it just depends on how far you can extend that around in terms of how much planning you do on the lead-ins.
What's that?
We've got some.
Would be a good compromise.
We've got some images which I'll go through just to give you members a bit of a snapshot as to what we've been doing around the town. So this is just some projects that the staff have been progressing as operational projects.
And it looks really good because I go there every Saturday.
Yeah. So keep going, Dale. So we'll flick through this. This is Councillor Fraser mentioned this. This is an operating project along the southern entry as you come in near Trinity, opposite Greening Copperfield Reserve there, Trinity Drive, where we've cleaned up what is technically an area that DIT is responsible for maintaining. We've gone through there and did the vegetation management. We lifted up the trees, we got rid of all the dead stuff, and it allows them to come in now and mow more effectively. So we have planted some callistemons through the rear to help with some of the screening, but also to extend that row of callistemons that are by the entry. I think it's a Gullah, is it Wilson or Dundee? To extend them through that area as well. So provide a bit more of an entry feature. So that's a beautification project that we've taken on in-house. Some planting that goes on annually in Martin's Place. Through, keep going, Lions Park and Pine Park that occurs. Obviously our annual street tree planting, 300 trees. Interestingly, we've done finished our tree condition audit. We've visited every tree, had a consultant pick up and GIS the trees, so we know what we have, what age, what condition they're in, where they are, what sort, and where we don't have a tree. And at the moment, we've got 6,000 vacant tree wells. So there's plenty of opportunities for more trees in the town of Gawler. And at the moment, our service level is 300 trees replaced every year. So, and that's some of that is replacing trees that have died as well. So there is a bit of a opportunity there, and that's something I'll touch upon when I bring the report back to council. The irrigation upgrade that the councillor, Deputy Mayor Samble and the CEO popped in and saw the other day, that will create another 2,000. That's part of an irrigation project that will connect up to the new playground that we're going to commence hopefully in July. It's been a bit delayed, but and the industry is really pumping at the moment. It's hard to get contractors, but effectively that'll create 2,000 square metres of irrigated turf where there currently was a very low service level and a lot less than that. So that does respond to some of the feedback. This is what Deputy Mayor Samble was referring to on the Link Road. That's those roundabout treatments that are being provided. They're doing very well, irrigated, low maintenance design that we can drive a truck up and maintain it on the actual roundabout, not in a very obvious way, but that's all part of that design work. So there's certainly a fair bit going on in the township. They'll keep moving. In Walker Place is certainly looking magnificent at the moment, which is great, and the trees have really taken with the environment we've provided for them. And obviously there's going to be more work occurring in 21. Oh, sorry, this is the planting that occurred more recently along Gawler Green. There was some commentary in that regard in the feedback that we received. This planting has since gone in, and certainly in the process of being handed over. Sorry, there'll be a maintenance contract with DIT for a period of time before it's handed over to council. Moving forward, the Murray Street Stage 7, the areas that are hashed there will be planted out around the intersection of 12th and 7th. So the central median and the little protuberance there on the corner of 10th. So that'll be coming as part of this Murray Street Stage 7 project. With respect to the Gullah rail electrification, we've received $203,000 for new tree planting. So those new trees will be focused on along the rail corridor per se, to assist with that visual buffer, or in the vicinity, in the local surrounds of the rail corridor. So we're going to get some really good outcomes from that project itself. So directly responding to some of this community feedback as well. So just through, Councillor.
Yeah.
Because that's offset planting, there will have to be native vegetation, because most of those river red gums that will natives, so you'd be replacing them again with the same species you're taking out.
How many river red gums are you removing?
I don't have the information directly on me. It's not directly offset planting through like native vegetation offset. It's a compensation for tree loss. So it's at council's discretion how the trees are replaced.
You're not going to plant sugar gums, are you?
There hasn't been a decision as to the where and what in terms of the trees. That's something that we need to work through, and ideally, I think we're going to have to present a position back to council as to what we're thinking in that space.
Yep, sure.
My understanding is if it is, it should actually be native vegetation that's being replaced with native vegetation. That's the whole idea that DIT is allowing that to do what it's doing. It's supposed to be done in the spirit of the legislation. Yeah, if a deal is done outside of legislation, it should still be done within that sort of framework.
So something that we consider. There's certainly
Councillor Hughes knows what he's talking about.
There's no ties with. There is no ties with the money. So they've been provided to council for its use. But take on board what Councillor Hughes is saying in terms of the type of vegetation. We haven't turned our attention to that, but it's been very implicit in the documentation we have. It's not tied to council investing in potentially new tree planting or landscaping, or indeed works along the rail corridor. It's at our discretion. It's a compensation payment for vegetation loss.
So are you saying you're not going to plant natives?
We haven't turned our attention to it, Madam Mayor, to be honest. We haven't got in our thinking as to where that, insofar as what we provided to council previously, it should be used to offset the vegetation loss along the rail corridor. And that's really as far as we've got with our thinking.
Okay, so when will we know what you're planting? When will we know? When will council know?
Well,
or will we know after you've done it?
Madam Mayor, once we've developed a position in terms of, we'll come back to council with some options in that regard, and the IS committee can have a conversation in terms of how it might want to invest that money.
Okay, all right, thank you. Certainly,
in terms of in 21-22, that beautification enhancement within a portion of Princess Park, we've been successful in getting a $350,000 grant for a $700,000 project. So there's going to be an upgrade as it relates to a community recreation hub. So Dale, you might want to circle whereabouts on that plan that is, sort of in that vicinity there. So that's certainly another uplift on a very barren area at the moment in Princess Park. That'll be coming in 21-22. In terms of the budget as it stands, there is a below the line bid for that section of reinstating irrigation in Copperfield Reserve as you come in on that southern entry. And just really that'll become an ongoing bid that we consider each year in terms of these new irrigation areas, responding to the community feedback that we get and the landscape irrigation management plan and council's previous resolutions in that regard to try and progress bringing back some of these areas back online. But there's multiple priorities in that regard.
But I'm going to just play devil's advocate here. I mean, my view is that we need bang for our buck. Certainly, this can look really nice as you drive your kids to Trinity College. However, I think we can do better than that. We can actually, if we're going to use that 150,000 or whatever it is that we invest, using it on roundabouts, using it as multiple tree planting across the town so people actually see an improvement. I'm not particularly fussed whether this gets re-irrigated or not. But certainly around that, where you were planting further closer to Gullah Green, but even down in that barren area as you come into Gullah, I'd like to see something there. I think there's real opportunity there as you drive past. You drive past that, you don't necessarily notice it, but it's the entranceways and some of those barren areas, particularly if you look at the feedback along both main North roads, southern and north, potentially Ride Street, where you've got a real opportunity to have quite a quick impact without necessarily huge cost. Whereas I see that as that'll chew up a lot of money, and yes, it'll look lovely, but lots of other areas we could actually do first, and maybe we can revisit that later. But I'd really like to see some of the entranceways. And I go back to the biodiversity. I'm really keen on maintaining our biodiversity. Yeah, but that's just me playing devil's advocate. I'm sure other people have different views. What's that?
Well, it's also the other side of the road. If you do that side of the road, you have to do the other side of the road. If you do that side, it's just...
Well, if you actually also look at a social justice agenda, if you overlay a social justice agenda, you look at your poorer areas and you focus on them so that poor families get really good public open space. And across the road is Evanston, and that's where it is actually needed, on the side of that road. That would, as you come in and you see the Gullah sign, you've got the tattoo parlour, etc. But you could, there's plenty of space to do something really interesting. I haven't been down there for a while, I must go and have a look. But yeah, so you can actually have really impressive bang for your buck without necessarily spending a fortune.
So I think we've come to the last slide, I think, Dale, is that right? In terms of, another below the line bid, tree management strategy to help inform some of this tree planting and those, how we manage that tree stock. It's certainly something that's on our agenda. It hasn't managed to make its way up to be a funded project yet, but it's certainly one that I think was certainly in the space we're in with climate change, resilience, heat island, how we can manage our tree stock more effectively. How do we actually, what do we need to do to manage that into the future for future generations? What do we want our township to look like? It's certainly something that's on our agenda as one of the priority strategy documents we'd like to progress in the shorter term.
I think there's real opportunity to have almost a perception of transformation when you only do short bursts of it. So you could do it at the beginning of an entranceway, not all the way down. Look at your tree stock and don't pull out perfectly healthy trees that have gotten through a 10-year drought. That to me is criminal. Leave them there. But look at the S-bend, for example. There's plenty of opportunity, and there was a great design in the beautification plan just there, not necessarily all the way down, but just there. Fix up the wall or put a different wall as you go up the hill. There's all sorts of community projects that you could do in partnership with community groups. That doesn't mean council pays for it all, but yeah, just at the beginning of different areas, I think would be, you get that perception of a real bang for buck, and like Kelvin says, really good impact. Paul and then Brian.
I just want to speak a bit about this plan. I think it's something that we should actually look at as a council, because managing trees is quite nuanced, because trees are at different stages. There's seedling, juvenile, mature, middle-aged and senescing. And at those different stages, you need to have different management practices. For example, at seedling, you do a lot of formative pruning, juvenile, more canopy management. At mature and middle-aged, the trees are at their maximum size. They tend to stay where they are. And then senescing, you need to get a bit of work onto them. But by having a good tree management strategy plan, you'll be able to be quite nuanced in the way that you manage those trees. So some trees you might have to manage every year, some every 5 years. So I think over time, if you had the plan, you'd probably get your money back over time. And it's and by doing that, the trees will be healthier and safer. So I think it's something we should really look at bringing above the line. Thanks.
Brian?
Thank you, Mayor Karen. I'm just wondering, in the info I got, I read about the point of jacarandas and bottle brush, but for Russell and James, was there any,
So that's,
was there any conversation of what?
Are you looking at the one that says, Brian, are you looking at the one that says confidential? So what we decided at the beginning was that if we want, we can talk about that, but I think we need to go into confidence.
Basically I'll go back to what Paul was saying about the management of trees. But I mean, maybe did Russell and James, out of the people you spoke to or whatever, has there been a tree that's, we don't have to have the same as everybody else. And as David has said about the point of keeping them, native trees and things like that. But, the colour also, evergreen or whatever, was there any trees that came out that stood out? We know that bottle brush stand out now, but they're around the town. But was there anything else that popped out of people you spoke to?
Yeah, look, trees are a really hard one. And I think as we've had multiple discussions here, there's no perfect tree. Some people certainly have a preference for natives and they've made it clear. Other people really want that structured planting and they want to see seasonal change. and they've talked about Barossa and why they like that so much. So look, I think it really has to be a mix and a varied, and we've got to be horses for courses. There are some roads and entries which are more suited to native plantings, where we've got bigger, wider verges. Where we're tighter and we have limited space, that might be where you look more at, deciduous exotic species, which are perhaps more suited to growing, in those environments. I think it's not a one-stop shop. I think that's why we need to come up with a pretty broad list that then allows us flexibility, and we do look at each particular street, on its own merit. Certainly, look, I'm not opposed, personally, to having colour and having things like jacarandas, but in the right spot as well. And I think that mix, is probably going to provide best bang for buck as well, because you'll get colour throughout the whole year. It won't just be, this time of year we're getting this. And also it might help with maintenance as far as leaf drop. I mean, I know when Sam worked at Norwood, the leaf drop in early winter, late August is huge with the plane trees, and we're doing a streetscape there, and the plane trees are a huge issue as far as, the leaf litter and how to deal with that. So yeah, there's lots of considerations and no perfect tree, but I think if we have a varied approach and horses for courses is probably the way to go. Yeah.
I might.
I see native attractive. You must have said something that wasn't native. But there was a tree that came from South Africa, for the horses to be underneath so there was no flies, and they're evergreen all the year round. I planted a number of them up at my property, and they're called pepper trees. And they are absolutely fantastic. And because it's so hot here in Gullah, people could shelter underneath them and all that sort of stuff. I just wondered whether the pepper trees came up. That was all.
Okay. So is there any appetite to discuss this particular document that's got confidential? Does anyone want to, or do we want to just have a think and review that ourselves? Yeah. Is that okay, everyone? All right. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. I think that's been quite a useful discussion. Thank you to our consultants from Landscape, staff who came along, Sam and your team, Dale, who did an absolutely amazing job with the audio visual. Yeah.